The rain was a silver sheet, blurring the city into a watercolor of bleeding neon and fractured light. It was a pathetic cliché, Lena thought, for the world to weep with her. Her hand, slick with rain, slipped on the cold brass handle of the taxi door. Inside, the dome light cast a sterile, unforgiving glow on Damien's face. His perfect, devastating face. It was a mask of strained control, the muscles in his jaw so tight she feared they might snap. "Don't," he said. The word was not a command. It was a plea, ragged and broken, a sound so alien from him it physically hurt her to hear. "I have to," she whispered, her own voice a stranger's. Her heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs, desperate for an escape that didn't exist. To stay was a cage. To leave was a cage. Only the bars were different. "Everything you're afraid of, I can control it. I can protect you." Her gaze drifted past him to the monolithic tower of glass and steel where he lived, a fortress in the sky that had felt like a prison. She looked back at him, at the man who owned that fortress and 100 other things she couldn't comprehend. The man she loved. The terrible, impossible truth of it burned behind her eyes. "I know you can," she said, her voice finally steady, finally hers again. "But who will protect me from you?" The question landed in the suffocating silence of the cab, and she saw it strike him. It was a mortal wound. His carefully constructed composure shattered, leaving behind a raw, desperate agony that mirrored her own. He had no answer. There was no answer. With a final wrenching sob that she choked back into a gasp, Lena pulled the door shut, locking him away. The taxi lurched forward, and his face, a pale blur of anguish, disappeared into the rain-streaked night. 3 months earlier, rain had been the last thing on her mind. The city was in the grip of a sweltering, sticky summer, and Lena Jones's life was a carefully balanced equation of exhaustion and desperation. 2 jobs, 1 tiny apartment shared with her perpetually optimistic roommate Chloe, and a mountain of student loan debt that felt like its own malevolent entity. Tonight's job was a side gig, a one-off catering event that paid 3 times her usual waitressing rate. It was in a ballroom so opulent it felt like a parody of wealth, a place where the chandeliers probably cost more than her entire college education. "Keep your head down, your smile plastered on, and whatever you do, don't spill anything on the ancient billionaire in the corner," Chloe had advised her that morning, miming a curtsy. "He looks like he's made of dust and lawsuits." Lena was trying. She moved through the glittering throng with a tray of champagne flutes, her black uniform simple and anonymous. She was a ghost here, a functional part of the scenery, and that was exactly how she liked it. She was good at being invisible. Her life depended on it, on blending in, working hard, and saving every penny for the dreams she barely let herself whisper aloud. A small, quiet bookstore of her own. A place of peace, filled with stories that were not her own chaotic narrative. She refilled glasses, offered canapés, and ignored the casual condescension of the guests. It was a familiar dance. But then, the atmosphere in the room shifted. A heavy, expectant silence fell, thick with tension. The music softened to a barely there hum. At the far end of the ballroom, on a slightly raised dais, an imposing older man with a cruel twist to his mouth stood beside an empty, throne-like chair. Lena recognized him from newspaper clippings Chloe used for her art projects. Ivan Volkov, a name synonymous with old-world power and new-world ruthlessness. His empire was in shipping and logistics, the paper said, but the rumors whispered of darker, more brutal enterprises. A door opened, and a man stepped into the room. Damien Volkov. He moved with a lethal grace that seemed to suck the air from his path. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so exquisitely tailored it looked like a second skin, his dark hair cut sharp and severe. A subtle, silvery scar cut a line along his jaw, a fascinating imperfection in a face that was otherwise a study in harsh, masculine beauty. He didn't walk, he stalked, his eyes scanning the room with a look of profound, chilling boredom. He took his seat on the throne-like chair beside his father, a king surveying a kingdom he clearly despised. Lena's stomach clenched. This was a different breed of wealthy. The other guests were peacocks, displaying their feathers. This man was a panther, coiled and dangerous even in repose. Then, the truly bizarre part began. A line of women, 50 of them, began to file into the room. They were all impossibly beautiful. Runway models with legs that went on for miles and expressions of practiced allure. They formed a silent, glittering procession, walking one by one past the dais where Damian Volkov sat. Ivan Volkov spoke, his voice carrying an accent as sharp and cold as Siberian winter. "A man of your stature needs a wife, Damian. A partner to solidify the family's public face. Choose one." Lena felt a wave of nausea. A cattle call. They were parading these women in front of him like he was picking a new car. It was medieval. It was grotesque. She saw the flicker of a muscle in Damian's jaw, the only sign of his reaction. His face was a stone mask, his eyes empty. He was looking, but he wasn't seeing. His gaze drifted over the models, over their perfect faces and designer gowns, and it was like he was looking through them. He saw assets, transactions, pieces on a board in his father's endless game. He felt a familiar, suffocating loneliness, a hollowness that all the power and money in the world couldn't fill. This was his life, a gilded cage, and his father was the zookeeper. The anger was a low, familiar burn in his gut. He wanted to destroy something. He wanted to scream. Instead, his gaze kept moving, past the line of shimmering women, past the expectant faces of the city's elite, past everything he was supposed to want. And then, it stopped. It landed on a waitress. She was standing near a marble column, her shoulders slumped just slightly with fatigue. She was not like the other women. There was no artifice, no practiced smile. Her focus was entirely on the precariously balanced tray in her hands, a small frown of concentration on her face. A strand of dark hair had escaped her simple bun and curled against her cheek. In a room screaming with manufactured perfection, her authenticity was a thunderclap. The world didn't just slow for Damian, it fractured. The drone of the party, the face of his father, the line of beautiful dolls, it all dissolved into a meaningless peripheral blur. There was only her. He saw the weariness in her posture, the strength in the set of her jaw, the quiet dignity in her simple black uniform. He felt a pull so visceral, so absolute, it was like a physical blow to the chest. It was not lust. It was something deeper, something terrifying. It was recognition. Lena, oblivious, shifted her weight, and a single glass on her tray wobbled. She caught it with a nimble movement, her breath catching in her throat for a second. The small, human moment of near failure and quick recovery was, to Damian, the most captivating thing he had ever seen. He stood up. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Ivan Volkov's face darkened with fury. Damian ignored it all. He began to walk, his path a straight, unwavering line. He walked past the first model, whose practiced smile faltered. He walked past the 10th, the 20th. He walked past all 50 of them, leaving a wake of confusion and wounded pride. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of the waitress. Lena froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The most dangerous man in the room was looking at her. Not through her, at her. His eyes, a startlingly intense shade of gray, were like smoke and steel, and they held her captive. She felt stripped bare, seen in a way that was both terrifying and utterly new. The silence in the room was now a living entity, heavy and suffocating. "You," Damien Volkov said, his voice a low, resonant command that cut through the silence. Step forward. Lena's mind went blank. Her entire world narrowed to the space between them, to his intense, unreadable gaze. Fear, sharp and cold, shot through her. But beneath it, something else stirred. A spark of defiance. A refusal to be ordered around like a piece of furniture. She lifted her chin, her own eyes meeting his. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear, laced with an incredulity that bordered on insubordination. A ghost of a smile, so faint it was barely there, touched Damien's lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "I said," he repeated, his voice dropping even lower, a velvet rumble meant only for her. "Step forward." The world exploded into frantic whispers around them. Lena felt hundreds of eyes on her, dissecting her, judging her. Her pulse was a frantic drum in her ears. This was a nightmare, a bizarre, terrifying, public nightmare. Ivan Volkov was now on his feet, his face a mask of incandescent rage. "Damien, what is the meaning of this?" his father boomed. Damien didn't even glance at him. His focus was entirely, unnervingly, on Lena. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw the flicker of fire. She hadn't flinched. She had challenged him. "This is creepy," Lena said, her voice dropping to a near whisper so only he could hear. The words were out before she could stop them. It was professional suicide, but she couldn't help it. The corner of his mouth twitched again. This time, it was genuine amusement. "Is it?" he murmured back, his gaze unwavering. "Summoning the help like a feudal lord?" "Yes, I'd file that under creepy," she retorted, her grip tightening on her tray. It was her only shield. "My father's event," he said, a subtle apology and an explanation in one. "Not my methods." He took a half step closer, and she had to fight the instinct to step back. "What is your name?" "Not relevant," she clipped out. "I'm working." "Damien!" Ivan's voice was a whip crack. Damien finally turned his head, his expression shifting from intense focus to pure Arctic cold. "The selection is over, father. You may dismiss them." He turned back to Lena, the shift back to that unnerving intimacy instantaneous. "You are no longer working, not for tonight." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a sleek black wallet, and extracted a card. A black credit card, made of metal. He didn't try to hand it to her. He placed it on her tray, next to the wobbling champagne flute. "My apologies for the scene," he said, his voice sincere. "I would like to have dinner with you. Tomorrow. Name any restaurant in this city. My driver will pick you up." Lena stared at the card as if it were a venomous spider. This was insane. This was a man who had just publicly humiliated 50 women. A man whose father looked like he ordered executions for fun. And he was asking her out? "No," she said. The word was small, but firm. He blinked. It was a slow, deliberate motion. He looked genuinely taken aback, as if the word no was a foreign concept. "I beg your pardon?" "No, thank you," she clarified, a hint of sarcastic politeness creeping in. "I have plans." Her plans consisted of laundry and a date with a pint of cheap ice cream, but he didn't need to know that. "Cancel them." It wasn't a suggestion. "They're very important plans," she said, her mind racing. "With my, very sick grandmother." He stared at her for a long moment, his gray eyes seeming to see right through the clumsy lie. A long, agonizing silence stretched between them. Lena's heart pounded. She fully expected him to call security, to have her fired, to have her blacklisted from every service job in the city. Instead, he let out a low, rough sound that might have been a laugh. "Your grandmother," he repeated, the words laced with a dry, self-deprecating humor she never would have expected. "Of course." He gestured to the card on her tray. "This is for your trouble, for the interruption." He paused. and for your grandmother's medical bills." Before she could protest, before she could throw the card back at him, he turned and strode out of the ballroom, leaving behind a maelstrom of shock, fury, and speculation. Lena was left standing in the center of it all, the black card burning a hole on her tray, the weight of his stare still pressed against her skin. She was fired, of course. Not by the catering manager, who looked at her with a mixture of terror and pity, but by proxy. The event was abruptly canceled. Everyone was sent home. As she was changing out of her uniform, the manager slipped her an envelope thick with cash. "From Mr. Volkov," he'd stammered. "He said to tell you he's sorry." It was $5,000, more money than she had in her savings account. It felt dirty. It felt like a down payment. She walked home, the black credit card feeling heavy and dangerous in her pocket. The city air was still thick and hot, but she felt a chill run down her spine. She had been seen by a panther, and she had the terrifying feeling that he was not the type to give up the hunt. The next day, a bouquet of flowers arrived at her apartment. Not roses, but a wild, beautiful arrangement of sunflowers and blue delphiniums. The card was simple, written in a strong, sharp hand. "For your grandmother, D.V." Okay, this has officially crossed the line from creepy to stalker-level creepy, Chloe announced, peering at the flowers as if they might be bugged. "How did he even find our address?" "He's Damien Volkov," Lena said, her voice flat. She was sitting at their small kitchen table, staring at the black card. "I imagine he can find out anything he wants." She felt violated. Her small, anonymous life had been breached. "So, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to ignore it," Lena declared, sweeping the flowers into the trash. It felt wasteful, but it was a necessary statement. "I'm going to go to my actual job at the diner, come home, and pretend last night never happened." But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. When she stepped out of her building, a sleek black town car was idling at the curb. The same car, she suspected, that had been meant to pick her up for their non-existent date. The back window glided down, and there he was, Damien Volkov, looking impossibly out of place on her run-down street. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore dark jeans and a simple gray Henley that stretched across his broad chest, making him look less like a CEO and more like someone who knew how to handle himself in a fight. The effect was, unfortunately, just as intimidating. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm. Lena stared at him, her hands clenched into fists. "This is my street. You can't just show up here." "I believe it's a public street," he countered, a hint of that dry humor in his tone. "I was hoping to apologize again, in person." "You apologized with $5,000 and a flower delivery to my private address. We're past apologies and well into restraining order territory." He had the grace to look chagrined. "My methods are direct. I'm not good at this." "Good at what? Harassing waitresses?" "Meeting someone," he said, and the simple words held a world of loneliness that caught her off guard. "Someone who isn't trying to merge a corporation with my family." She hesitated. He looked tired. The arrogance from the party was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity. "Look, Mr. Volkov." "Damien," he corrected gently. "Damien," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'm not one of your models. I'm not a business acquisition. I'm a person trying to get to her shift at a diner so I can pay my rent. I don't fit in your world." "What if I want to fit in yours?" he asked. The question was so unexpected, so absurd, that she laughed. It was a short, sharp, incredulous sound. "My world involves burnt coffee, sticky tables, and customers who tip in spare change. You wouldn't last 5 minutes." "Try me," he said. He opened the car door. "Let me drive you to work, and then let me take you to dinner tonight. Not at some place you've seen in a magazine, A place of your choosing. Pizza, a food truck, I don't care, just talk to me. She should have said no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to run in the other direction. This man was danger personified. He was a complication she could not afford. But as she looked at him, she didn't see the kingpin from the ballroom. She saw a man who looked profoundly, achingly lonely, who was trying, however clumsily, to make a human connection. And against her better judgment, she was curious. "Fine," she said, the word tasting like surrender. "One dinner, my choice, and you will not, under any circumstances, try to pay for my half of a $10 pizza with a black credit card." A real, genuine smile finally broke across his face. It transformed him. The harsh lines softened, the coldness in his eyes thawed, and for a split second, he looked boyish and hopeful. It was a smile like a punch to the chest. "I promise," he said. That night, they ate pizza from a box, sitting on a bench in Washington Square Park. It was the most surreal experience of Lena's life. Damien, in his designer jeans that probably cost more than her rent, looked utterly out of his element. Yet he didn't complain. He listened. He asked her about her classes, about her dream of opening a bookstore. He didn't offer to buy her one. He asked what her favorite books were, why she loved them. He spoke little about himself, but what he did say was veiled in metaphor. He talked about the pressures of a family business, the weight of a legacy he hadn't chosen. He made it sound like any other corporate heir struggling under a domineering father. Lena, wanting to believe in the simple version, allowed herself to accept it. As he walked her back toward her apartment, a comfortable silence settled between them. The city lights softened the hard edges of his face. "I don't understand this," she admitted quietly, stopping under the dim glow of a streetlight a block from her home. "Why me?" He stopped too, turning to face her fully. "I don't know how to explain it," he said, his voice low and serious. "When I saw you, it was like the whole room went quiet. You were the only real person there." Her heart did a slow, painful flip. It was the most romantic and most terrifying thing anyone had ever said to her. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment, before his fingers gently brushed the strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek. His touch was feather-light, yet it sent a jolt of electricity through her. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. His lips met hers, and it was nothing like she'd expected. There was no forceful possession, no arrogant claim. It was a question. It was tentative, gentle, and achingly soft. It was a kiss full of a vulnerability he would never show the rest of the world. In that moment, he wasn't Damien Volkov, the formidable heir. He was just Damien, a man afraid of being rejected. Lena's hands came up to rest on his chest, and she kissed him back, pouring all her confusion and fear and the terrifying spark of hope into the gesture. It was a leap of faith off a very high cliff, and she had no idea what was waiting at the bottom. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Tomorrow?" he whispered. "Tomorrow," she agreed, her voice barely audible. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Damien was relentless in his pursuit, yet surprisingly respectful of her boundaries. He never pushed. He courted her with an old-fashioned intensity that was both charming and overwhelming. He met her for lunch between her classes, waited for her shift to end at the diner, and took her on dates that were a strange mix of their two worlds. One night it would be a hidden jazz club in a basement in the village. The next, it would be a private viewing at the Met after it had closed to the public. He brought her to his home, a penthouse that occupied the top 3 floors of the Volkov Tower. The elevator opened directly into a living space so vast and minimalist, it felt more like an art gallery than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the entire city. It was beautiful, sterile, and deeply impersonal. Lena felt a fresh wave of anxiety. She walked across the polished marble floor, her worn-out boots feeling sacrilegious. "You live here?" she asked, her voice small. "I exist here," he corrected, watching her expression closely. "It was my father's choice. He believes a man's home should project power." "It projects loneliness," she said without thinking. His expression softened. "It is lonely." He walked over to a panel on the wall and pressed a button. A section of the vast white wall slid away, revealing a library. It was a startling contrast to the rest of the apartment. Warm, welcoming, with floor-to-ceiling shelves of worn, well-read books, comfortable leather armchairs, and a faint scent of old paper and whiskey. "This is mine," he said. "The only part that feels like it belongs to me." It was in that library that she began to fall for him. Not for the power or the wealth, but for the man who would get lost in history books, who had a surprising love for poetry, and who listened to her talk about her bookstore dream with an intensity that made her feel like the most important person in the world. One evening, as they were sitting in the library, a man entered without knocking. He was built like a heavyweight boxer, with a shaved head and pale, watchful eyes. He nodded curtly at Damien. "Mikhail," Damien said, his posture straightening slightly. "This is Lena." Mikhail's eyes flickered to Lena for a fraction of a second. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a swift, professional assessment. "A pleasure," he said, the words clipped. He then turned back to Damien, speaking in rapid, low Russian. Lena didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was urgent. It was dangerous. Damien's entire demeanor had changed. The relaxed man who had been laughing with her a moment ago was gone, replaced by the cold, decisive kingpin from the ballroom. He replied in the same low, guttural tones, giving a series of short, sharp commands. Mikhail nodded once and left as silently as he had arrived. The warmth in the room had vanished. "Who is that?" Lena asked, trying to keep her voice light. "My head of security," Damien said, his eyes distant. "An old friend." It sounded serious. He turned to her, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just business. A shipment was delayed." She knew it was a lie. A delayed shipment didn't warrant that kind of tension. It didn't warrant a coded conversation in a language she couldn't understand. For the first time, the vague, shadowy nature of his family business began to feel less like a corporate drama and more like something sinister. Later that week, Mikhail found Damien alone, staring out at the city from his office window. "She's a civilian, Dee," Mikhail said, his voice low. He was the only person who could speak to Damien this way. They had grown up together, bled together. "I ran the background check you asked for. She's clean. A student, a waitress. Her biggest crime is an overdue library book." Damien didn't turn around. "I know." "This life will break her," Mikhail stated, not as a warning, but as a fact. "Or it will get her killed. You know what your father is like. He sees her as a liability." "I'll protect her," Damien bit out, his hand clenching into a fist. "You can't protect her from what you are," Mikhail said quietly. "He's already watching her." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. Damien knew he was right. His father, Ivan, saw love not as a strength, but as a weakness to be exploited. A lever. And Lena was becoming the most powerful lever anyone could possibly have against him. The first sign of trouble came 2 days later. Lena was walking home from the diner after a late shift, the streets quiet and mostly empty. A dark sedan pulled up beside her, moving at her pace. She quickened her steps, her heart starting to pound. The back window slid down. It wasn't Damien. It was an older man, His face seamed with scars, his eyes cold and empty. "Miss Jones," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "A word of advice. Some ponds are too deep for little fish. You swim in them, you drown." He didn't threaten her directly. He didn't have to. The menace was a palpable force pressing in on her. The car sped off, leaving her standing on the sidewalk, trembling, her blood running cold. She ran the rest of the way to her apartment, fumbling with her keys, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She slammed the door behind her and leaned against it, her body shaking uncontrollably. This wasn't a delayed shipment. This was the dark underbelly she had been trying so hard to ignore. When Damien called her, she could barely speak. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, his voice sharp with concern. "We need to talk," she managed to say. "Come to my apartment, now." He was there in 15 minutes. The moment he saw her face, the pale shock and the residue of terror in her eyes, his own expression hardened into something murderous. "What happened?" he demanded, his hands gently gripping her shoulders. "Tell me." She told him about the car, the man, the chilling words. As she spoke, she watched the color drain from his face, replaced by a cold, controlled fury. He looked away from her, his jaw working, and she knew. She knew he had been expecting this. "This is your world, isn't it?" she whispered, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "This isn't just business, it's something else." He finally met her eyes, and the agony in his gaze was gut-wrenching. The time for lies and half-truths was over. "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse. "What is it, Damien? What is the Volkov family business?" she pressed, needing to hear the words, needing to face the truth she had been avoiding for weeks. He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into icy water. He led her to the sofa and sat beside her, but he didn't touch her. He owed her the truth, without comfort, without coercion. "My great-grandfather started it in the old country. Smuggling, extortion, things people do to survive," he began, his voice low and steady, a recitation of a history he knew by heart. "When my grandfather brought it here, it grew. Shipping, logistics, those are the public faces. They're real, they're legitimate, but they were built on a foundation of other things that are not legitimate." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We enforce contracts, we acquire assets, we move goods that other companies won't touch. There is violence, there is danger. It's a legacy I inherited, Lena. A throne I never asked for but was born to sit on. My father, he believes in the old ways. He believes power is taken and held by force." He finally looked at her, his eyes pleading for an understanding he didn't deserve. "This is who I am. This is the world you stepped into the night I saw you in that ballroom." Lena stared at him, her mind reeling. Smuggling, extortion, violence. The words echoed in the small, safe space of her apartment, poisoning it. The man she was falling in love with, the man who loved poetry and listened to her dreams, was a part of that. He was a kingpin, a gangster. It was a role from a movie, not something that could possibly be her life. All her principles, her deep-seated belief in right and wrong, in living a good, honest life, rose up in protest. This was everything she was against, everything she had worked so hard to keep out of her world. "The man in the car," she began, her voice trembling. "Was that your father?" "He works for my father," Damien confirmed, his voice tight with rage. "It was a message, to me, through you." She felt sick. She was a pawn, a tool to be used against him. The thought was horrifying, degrading. She stood up and walked to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. She looked out at the familiar, gritty street below, a world that suddenly felt a million miles away from the one she had been living in for the past few weeks. "I can't," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I can't do this." Damien was on his feet in an instant, crossing the room to stand behind her. He didn't touch her. "Lena, I can stop it. I can handle my father." "Can you?" she asked, turning to face him, her eyes flashing with a mix of fear and anger. "Can you just turn it off? Can you just decide to not be this? Because that man tonight, he wasn't scared of you. He was working for your family. You are your family." "I'm not my father," he said, his voice raw. "But you're his heir. You sit on the throne, Damien. You said it yourself." Her heart was breaking. It was splitting right down the middle, one half filled with a love for the man in front of her, the other with a deep, abiding terror of the world he represented. "I need to think." "What is there to think about?" he asked, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "I love you." The words, which she had longed to hear, were now a fresh torment. "I know," she whispered, tears finally welling in her eyes. "That's what makes this so impossible." She needed to get out. She needed air. She needed to be somewhere he wasn't, so she could untangle the knots in her stomach and her heart. "I need some time, Damien. Alone." He looked like she had physically struck him. The control, the power, it all fell away, leaving him looking lost. "All right," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But Lena, don't run from me." But running was the only thing that made sense. Running was survival. The next 2 days were a blur of misery. Lena didn't answer his calls. She didn't reply to his texts. She went to work, she came home, and she sat in silence, Chloe's attempts at comfort bouncing off the wall of her despair. Her mother called, and Lena could barely speak to her, knowing the disappointment that would follow if she told her the truth. "I always knew that kind of money was trouble," her mother would say, and for once, she would be right. Lena thought about the bookstore, her quiet, peaceful dream. How could that dream possibly coexist with a world of violence and fear? How could she sell novels to children in the afternoon, knowing that the man she loved might be ordering someone to break a man's legs in the evening? The two realities could not exist in the same universe. She had to choose. On the third night, she made her decision. It felt less like a choice and more like a sentence. She packed a small bag, booked a bus ticket home to the suffocating small town she had fought so hard to escape, and then she called him. "Meet me downstairs," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I'm leaving." And so she found herself in the back of a taxi, the rain lashing against the windows, facing the man whose world was about to break hers. It was time to deliver the killing blow. "I have to," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. Her heart was a frantic bird, and the cage was her own body, her own principles. "Everything you're afraid of, I can control it. I can protect you," he pleaded, his voice raw, stripped of all its usual power. She looked from his desperate face to the tower where he lived, a symbol of the gilded cage he had invited her into. "I know you can," she said, her voice finding a terrible, final strength. "But who will protect me from you?" The question hung between them, unanswered and unanswerable. She saw the devastation in his eyes as she pulled the door shut. The taxi moved, and his face became a pale smear in the rain-soaked darkness. She had saved herself. It felt exactly like dying. Damien watched the taillights of the taxi disappear. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, dripping down his face like tears. He didn't move. The street was empty, the city noise a distant hum. For the first time in his life, Damien Volkov, the man who had everything, felt true, abject poverty. He was bankrupt of hope. The world went gray. He went back upstairs to the penthouse that had never felt like a home and now felt like a mausoleum. The silence was absolute. Her scent lingered faintly in the library, a ghost of a life he had almost had. He swept a row of priceless first editions from a shelf, the sound of them crashing to the floor doing nothing to fill the void inside him. Mikhail found him there hours later, sitting in the dark, a bottle of whiskey in his hand, the glass untouched. "She's gone," Damien said. It wasn't a question. "Her roommate said she took a bus upstate, back to her mother's," Mikhail confirmed quietly. "Good," Damien said, the word a lie. "She's safe. And you?" Damien finally looked at his friend, his eyes hollow. "She asked who would protect her from me." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. She was right. The days that followed turned into weeks, then months. Damien became a wraith haunting his own life. He was more ruthless in his work, colder, more decisive. He crushed a rival organization with brutal efficiency. He negotiated a deal that solidified his family's power for another generation. His father was pleased. Ivan saw the return of the son he had raised, the cold-blooded heir. He didn't see that the son was hollowed out, a machine running on memory and rage. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Lena was suffocating. Her hometown was just as small and judgmental as she remembered. Her mother was a constant, suffocating presence of "I told you so's" and worried glances. "You're better off, honey," she'd say. "That world isn't for people like us." Lena tried to go back to her old life. She got a job at the local library. It was quiet. It was safe. It was utterly, soul-crushingly miserable. Every book she shelved reminded her of the library in the sky, of the man who quoted poetry and looked at her like she was the only person in the world. She was safe from him, but she was not safe from the memory of him. She was incomplete. Chloe called every night, her cheerful voice a painful reminder of the life she'd abandoned. "He's not doing well, Lena," Chloe told her one night, her voice hushed. "I see stuff in the papers. The Volkov group is in some kind of war. It sounds bad." Lena's heart seized. She hung up and, against her better judgment, went online. The business pages were full of it. Volkov Empire in turmoil. Hostile takeover bid from rival syndicate. Damien Volkov purges leadership. It was all couched in corporate language, but Lena could read between the lines. It was a war for the soul of his company, a war against his father's world. One night, Damien stood on his balcony, looking down at the city that felt like his prison. Mikhail's words echoed in his head. "You can't protect her from what you are." And then Lena's, "Who will protect me from you?" He finally understood. He couldn't have both. He couldn't have her and the darkness. The darkness would always poison the light. So he had to get rid of the darkness. It was a revelation. A terrifying, liberating moment of clarity. He had been trying to rule the world he was given. But what if he burned that world down and built a new one from the ashes? The next morning, he went to his father. Ivan was in his study, a dark, wood-paneled room that smelled of cigar smoke and old power. "We're going legitimate," Damien announced, no preamble. "Completely. We're dissolving the enforcement division. We're selling off the subsidiary shell corporations. We're cutting ties with the old partners." Ivan looked up from his desk, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "Have you lost your mind?" "I found it," Damien countered, his voice calm and resolute. "This ends, now, with me." "This is our family, our legacy," Ivan roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "This is what we are. You would throw away a century of power for a little waitress from the gutter?" "I would throw away the whole world for her," Damien said, the words simple, absolute truth. "And you will not call her that again." The war began. It was not a war fought with guns in the street, but in boardrooms and back alleys. It was a war of numbers, threats, and betrayals. Damien used the full extent of his power, not to conquer, but to dismantle. He was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly focused. He sold assets his father considered sacred. He fired men who had been with the family for 50 years, men with blood on their hands. He absorbed massive financial losses to sever toxic partnerships. Rivals, sensing weakness, attacked. His own people, loyal to the old ways, pushed back. There were threats against his life. One night, his car was forced off the road, a clear assassination attempt he and Mikhail fought their way out of. Damien took a shard of glass to the cheek, leaving a fresh, raw scar. He barely noticed. It was the price of absolution. Mikhail was by his side through it all, his loyalty absolute. "Are you sure about this?" he asked one night as they looked over charts showing the catastrophic yet intentional decline of their illicit revenue streams. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Damien said, his eyes on the horizon. After 6 months of brutal, relentless work, it was done. The Volkov Group was a fraction of its former size, but it was clean. The foundation, built on crime, had been ripped out and replaced with concrete and steel. The cost had been immense, both in wealth and in blood. His father was a broken man, his power gone, relegated to a quiet retirement he hadn't chosen. Damien was left with a legitimate, if smaller, empire, and he was, for the first time, free. He didn't call, he didn't send a car. He drove himself in a simple, unassuming sedan. He drove for 5 hours upstate to a town he had only seen in pictures from a background check file. He parked across the street from the local library, and he waited. At 5 o'clock, she walked out. She looked thinner, the vibrant spark in her eyes dimmed to a low ember. But it was her. His heart, which he thought had turned to stone, ached in his chest. He got out of the car and just stood there, on the opposite sidewalk. Lena saw him. Her steps faltered. The book she was carrying slipped from her fingers and fell to the pavement. She stared, her mind refusing to believe what her eyes were seeing. It was Damien. But he was different. He looked tired, worn. There was a new scar on his face, an angry red line on his cheek. He wasn't wearing a suit or designer clothes, just jeans and a worn leather jacket. He looked human. She slowly, hesitantly, crossed the street. She stopped a few feet from him, a safe distance. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "I came to answer your question," he said, his voice rough. She frowned, confused. "My question?" "Who will protect you from me?" He repeated her own devastating words. He took a step closer. "The answer is, you don't need protection from me anymore. Not from that part of me. It's gone." She searched his face, his impossibly gray eyes. "What are you talking about?" "I dismantled it," he said simply. "The family business, the old ways, the violence, the darkness. It's over. I sold it, I broke it, I buried it. My father is out. The men who threatened you are gone. The world that scared you doesn't exist anymore." He gestured to the new scar on his cheek. "It was a fight, but I won." Lena was speechless. She thought of the news reports, the whispers of a war. It had all been for this, for her. The sheer scale of what he had done, the sacrifice, the danger he had put himself in, was staggering. "It's not all clean yet," he continued, his voice raw with an honesty that stripped her bare. "The money is still there. The name is still there. The past will always be a shadow. But the violence is gone. The part that could hurt you is gone. I did it because a world without you in it wasn't a world I wanted to rule. It wasn't a world I could stand to live in." Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking relief. The man she loved had not just changed for her. He had burned down his entire world for the chance to build a new one with her. She saw the truth of it in his eyes. She saw the exhaustion, the pain, and the unwavering, absolute love that had fueled him. She closed the last few feet of distance between them without a second thought. Her hands came up to frame his face, her thumb tracing the new scar on his cheek. "You fool," she whispered, her voice thick with love. "You absolute, beautiful fool." And then she kissed him. It was not a gentle, tentative kiss like their first. It was a kiss of desperation and reunion, of promises kept and a future reclaimed. It was the end of their separation and the beginning of everything. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tightly she felt like she might merge with him, and he kissed her back with all the pent-up loneliness and longing of the past 6 months. It was a kiss that said, finally. It was a kiss that said, home. 1 year later, the bell above the door of A New Chapter, a small sun-drenched bookstore on a quiet Greenwich Village street, chimed softly. Lena looked up from the book she was shelving and smiled. Damien stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee. He was in a suit again, but it looked different on him now. He wore it like a man going to a job, not like a king wearing his crown. He handed her a cup and leaned against the bookshelf, watching her with a familiar, quiet intensity that no longer scared her. It was just love. "How was the meeting?" she asked, taking a sip of the coffee. "Perfect. Just how she liked it." "Boring," he said with a slight smile. "We acquired a sustainable energy startup. Very legitimate. Very dull." She laughed. His new world was one of corporate mergers and green technology, a far cry from the shadows he once inhabited. The Volkov name still carried weight, but now it was associated with aggressive but legal business tactics. He was still powerful, still wealthy, but he was a different man. He was her man. He had funded her bookstore, not as a gift, but through a formal loan from his restructured bank's small business division. She was paying it back, every month, with interest. It was her dream, built with her work, supported by his faith in her. In the evenings, he would come to the shop after work, shed his suit jacket, and sit in the worn armchair in the corner, reading while she closed up. The quiet, domestic peace was something neither of them had ever thought possible. The past was still there, a collection of scars, visible and invisible. But they were just that, scars, proof that they had survived. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch as gentle as it had been on the first night. "I love you," he said, the words as easy and natural as breathing. "I know," she said, her smile soft and full of a deep, unshakable peace. "I love you too." He leaned in and kissed her, a slow, sweet kiss amidst the stories of 1,000 other lives, in the heart of the new chapter they were writing for themselves, together. This story teaches us that true love is not about finding someone perfect, but about inspiring and committing to profound change. It shows that power and wealth are meaningless without someone to share them with, and that redemption is possible when fueled by a love strong enough to dismantle a world of darkness in order to build a new one in the light. It's a testament to the idea that our past does not have to define our future, and that the bravest act can be to choose love over legacy. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If this story moved you, please show your support by giving it a like, subscribing to our channel for more content like this, and sharing it with someone who appreciates a story of love and redemption. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What did you think of Damien's grand gesture? Was burning down his empire the only way he could truly be with Lena? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for our next story, we want you to choose. Should we tell the story of A. Mikhail, the loyal second-in-command, as he finds an unexpected love while trying to leave his violent past behind? Or B. Chloe, Lena's best friend, who accidentally gets involved with a rival family Damien defeated, putting her in terrible danger? Vote for A or B in the comments, and we'll write the winning story next.